days in the sun with the cold on the
Incredible. Also, Josh, you had your shades on the whole time, but you just look like a rock star. That was pretty awesome. Hey, everybody. My name is Evan, if you've not met me yet. And I'm on the leadership team here at Eastown. I've actually been around since the very beginning, since we started Eastown. I was just talking with Aaron, who's also been here forever. We were talking about how crazy it's just been what a journey it's been. And so we're kind of continuing on our series on the art of neighboring. And I've got to tell you, this, for me, has probably been the most impactful series that we've ever done here at Eastown. We did this about 5 years ago. And I want to share my story this morning with you about how much it changed really the fabric of my family and how we decided to live our lives. Because there's a lot of challenges around it, and I want to be real about those. And so last week, Clint talked a little bit about the great command about loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself, right? And that's really, really hard to do, if I'm honest with you. Like, I really like me a lot of times. I want to live life for me. I want to think about what I want. But to love my neighbor as myself and more is such a difficult challenge. And so I want to unpack that a little bit today. And last week, too, Clint talked about, right, this is an art. And you hear the phrase, maybe, it's an art, not a science. And I am not a mathematician. I am not a scientist. So if you are in the room, you can boo me later. I know there's like a lot of math equations and things like that. And there's numbers and letters that get combined. I don't know why people do that, but they do. But when you think about science, right, there's this like process that you follow and you come to the same conclusion. With mathematical equations, right, it all comes to the same conclusion. And I've got to be honest with you, it doesn't work like that with the neighboring thing. It really is an art in that what works to connect and get kind of close to your neighbors in one house does not work in the other house. And so this isn't this kind of like pre-programmed thing like, hey, if you just add these 3 easy steps, you'll be the mayor of your neighborhood. Like, that's not how this works. And really the intention is all about developing these relationships with those around us because Jesus calls us to do that. I'm going to unpack that a little bit today. And if you've been around Eastown for like 25 minutes or years or whatever, you know that this is really, really close to our heart. In fact, we have built this in the fabric of what we do. Like it's so a part of our DNA and everything. We're really, really intentional to say, hey, we care more about the community around us than kind of just creating this big Sunday morning church experience. In fact, one of the reasons we have you sitting in the hot box that is this tent, thank you, is that we want to just remind us that the church is not the 4 walls. The church is not in here. The church is actually us out there in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and loving people really, really well. And so maybe last week, right, you filled out that Connect card, or the neighborhood block card. If you were here last week, there's one in your seat today. And there's this little spaces around it. It looks like a little bit like a bingo card. And when we did this 5 years ago, I lost pretty badly in the bingo game. I could not fill out a single space. I didn't know anybody in my neighborhood. And I knew people like at my workplace, but I only really hung out or connected with people who I kind of jived with a little bit. Like, oh, you're cool to hang out with. So let's hang out. And even in most of the spaces that I was in, I was hanging out with people who it was just kind of simple and easy to hang out with. And I was kind of shook a little bit because I would have told you probably early on that my family really, really cared about other people. We tried to love people really well. But what we found out when my wife and I evaluated this, that actually what we cared more about was perhaps sometimes looking like we did, but not actually putting the action into doing that. And because we love all these global initiatives, right? And I think those are important. Don't get me wrong. Like giving money towards orphanages in developing countries, that's amazing. Keep doing that. Don't stop. Please don't stop. But what we were doing is we were doing that. But one thing about those things is there's such a large disconnect between us and them. I think it gets really easy sometimes to say, yeah, I'll give my money to that, or I'll give some energy to that, but then it actually doesn't change my daily practice or my daily life in any way. As you know, a lot of this is based on the book that Clint talked about last week, The Art of Neighboring, not to be confused with The Art of War, although I'm sure there's some similarities in there. Man, history people, I know you're laughing. Come on. And so this week, I want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the challenges that you might face as you think about taking this seriously. And so I want you to check out this slide. In order to take the Great Commandment seriously, right, to love God and love others, we have to create space in our lives to build relationships with those who live near us. Like, we have to create that space. And I would say this, and the next slide says, the biggest obstacle to it is time. If you want to take it seriously, you've got to put the time in. But the challenge is this, right, is we like to think, and I think it's actually true, like, I don't have time. I'm really, really busy. And I think that is true. Don't get me wrong. The Bay Area, when we moved here like 7 or 8 years ago, I was like, this place is wild. People are going all the time. Like, they get up and they go and they go and they've got the stuff. They do the work. They do the sports. They do the activities. They do the extracurriculars. I mean, they even like vacation busy, right? Like, let's fill every kind of momentary space. And so time is a challenge, but here's maybe the hard thing about that is, right? When we say like, I don't have time for it, what we're actually saying is I don't value it enough to create time for it. I don't value it enough to create time for it, because we do create things for time for the things that we love. And that's kind of the big point I want to get across to you this morning as I start is what we value or love, we will sacrifice for. I love to go to sleep. I do. I really do. There's nothing better. Like, I think that my bed is really, really comfortable. It's just got a peaceful thing. And people make fun of me. My students are calling me old man all the time, because if I could be in bed by 9:30 at night, life would be I'm like, oh, this is so good. I'm in bed by 9:30. I read a little bit. I know you guys are laughing at me. And then I go to bed, right? And I wake up and I'm like, oh, I had a great night of sleep. I want to be in bed by 9:30 every night. That is a value of mine. But one thing that I really love, is live music. I really do. Now, the type of live music I love, most people don't love. In fact, I invite Clint to these. He came one time, and then every time I've invited him since, he's had like an evening dentist appointment or something like that, you know. He's like, I'm hanging out with somebody. I'm like, there's no one near you. I can hear, there's no one there. He's like, no, I'm busy. Anyway, so I love these live music events, and so I'll often go to them. But the problem is that they start at 8 or like 8:30 or like 9. If you remember, I want to go to bed at 9:30. I don't want to be in San Francisco at 9 o'clock for something to start. But I do it all the time. Why? Because I love it. I really, really have a good time with these things. And so I will sacrifice sleep because I love these things so much. Now you might be like, are you encouraging me to go to rock concerts at 9 p.m. in the city that don't end until like past midnight? If you want to go with me, I'd love to have you, because Clint will not. But I am encouraging you to think about it in that context of like, hey, I really, really value something in our life, and I will create time for it because I care about it so much. And if Jesus is calling us to love our neighbors really, really well, and to go out there and create that space in our time for them, then I think there's something that we have to sacrifice. I think that we have to kind of create this space around it. And so the question to ask yourself is, what do you value and what do you love? What activities are you engaging in that match up with it? Because we live in this tension of like urgent and important. But if you don't define what those two things are in your life, you will constantly be led by the urgent, and you'll just continually respond to like everything that comes up to you on your plate, and before you know it, you'll have no time. They did a study and they found out that like people on average have about 26 minutes of free time in their day. They pack it so tightly. You might be like, I have 10, right? It's an average, so you know, we see you too. But here's the thing. I want you to think about living life intentionally versus unintentionally. When you know what you value, you can create space and a schedule around that. And if you value being around and being with and loving your neighbor, you will create space for it. And I'm not asking you to like give up everything, right? Like, okay, well, I just got to go to work and come back and like sit in the middle of the road until a neighbor asks me like, what are you doing? And then I'll get to know them. Don't do that. What I'm asking you to do is look at those things and say, is that something that we value in this home? And how can I use that thing to connect with those around me? Here's a great example. A lot of families, myself not included, are into the team sports, right? And that's a dominating thing. We have friends whose kids are in like all 8 sports at like one time. I'm like, how is that physically possible? And they're everywhere at all times, right? And if that's a family value, that's okay. But ask yourself like, hey, how can I use that to connect with those around me? Can I use the sports thing to invite some of those people from the team into my home for like an end of the year party, right? What can I do? Even with the music thing, I mean, people keep saying no, but every now and then I get a yes. I'll try to invite people with me to get to know them. Hey, let's go grab dinner beforehand and just be able to connect. Some of my deepest friendships are people who probably unwillingly go with me to these things. There's opportunity within what you're already doing to include people, but I also want you to think about, really, am I spending time doing things that aren't really important, but just are kind of urgent in my life? We're going to look at some of the ways that Jesus operated around this. Because I think, like here at Eastown, we are following Jesus. We believe Jesus is the Son of God, our Savior, that he died for us. And when we look at the life of Jesus, we want to model our lives as much as we can after him. And I think he provides a really great example of what we can do in our own lives to kind of maybe carve out some time and be intentional. So here's the first one. Be interruptible. I don't know if interruptible is a word, but when I was typing this out, it didn't do that like squiggly line thing underneath, so I think it's a word. And you look at Jesus and you read through, like, if you ever want to look at like how Jesus lived, there's these 4 books at the beginning of the second half of the Bible called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it's pretty much tracing his life and how he operated. And if you look, Jesus is never in a rush, never hurried. At no point is he like, well, guys, I got a busy schedule. I've got to get to this. I've got to get to that. I've got to get to this. So I don't have any time for what you're bringing up to me right now. Right? And so he's living life very intentionally, but not hurried. In fact, there's a very famous author who talks about hurry being the greatest enemy of your spiritual life. And it's so true. Like when we are in that rush, when we're constantly going, we actually can really miss out on the opportunities that Jesus is putting right in front of us. So let's look at a story from this. There's a story in Luke about a woman who's been unhealthy, who's been actually bleeding for like years and years and years, 12 years. Now, here's the crazy part of this story is that she's been trying to go to like doctors and stuff like that, and no one can heal her. And if you like history, which I do, I understand that's not a popular opinion. If you like history, culture at that time, you actually couldn't hang out with everybody if you had some kind of medical issue like that. You had to actually leave and go away from everybody else. And this woman is so desperate. And so Jesus is actually going from one thing to the other. He's actually going to heal somebody's son. This guy had come to him and said, my son is dying. Please come heal him. I know you have the power to do it. And Jesus is like, sure, like I'll come there. Now, if I have kids, I'm a dad. If I knew that there was somebody who could heal my kid, I would literally be like, come on. Like, let's go. Let's get to this right now. But Jesus, you read in it, and he's not rushed. He's taking his time, and he's in this crowd, and this lady, desperate, grabs him. And people knew where he was going, what he was going to do. It was kind of like, hey, let's go watch Jesus heal this guy. And she grabs him. And what's crazy about that too is in that culture at that time, she knew this, he knew this, that if he got touched by her because of her medical issue, he would actually have to leave the city center and go through this like cleansing process before he could come back. Which is wild to think that she was kind of willing to risk it all in that moment. But Jesus didn't say like, hey, get away from me, like get out of here. I got things to do. He immediately stopped and said like, who touched me? And everyone's like, it wasn't me, this is awkward. And Peter, his disciples, like, hey, no, but like this is just a crowd pressing up against you. He's like, no, somebody touched me. I can feel the power has gone out of me. And the woman says, it was me. She trembled and fell at his feet. and said, hey, kind of shared her story. I've been in pain. I've had this medical issue for 12 years. And she's healed. And she says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. And I think the lesson from that story is that Jesus took the time to stop and see her and heal her and commend her for her faith. What could have just been of say, that's a distraction, that's a distraction, that's a distraction. I've got to focus on this thing, which is what we often do, right? Life is so busy. We have all of the stuff to go and do and get to that we miss out on kind of real opportunities. I've been a high school teacher for a while, and no important mentoring, like guiding conversation have I ever had that was scheduled. Like, hey, yeah, I'll see you at 11:30, and then we'll have that really good talk because you're in crisis. It's always been when I'm actually wanting to go and do something else. With my own kids, I'm usually trying to get stuff done, and they're like, see me, right? But if I'm like, hey, you know what? I'll get to you in just a minute. Try to schedule me in, and I'll see you then. I've missed the moment, right? So be interruptible. Create space. And I like practices. I like some practicality in my life. And so I'm gonna give you two practices for today. This is the first one. And I know it's wild. I told a friend about this, and she was like, I won't do it. No, she didn't say that, but she was like, that's crazy. I want you to go home and in your neighborhood, take your kids with you, okay, leave them at home, and go for a walk around the neighborhood. But don't put your AirPods in, right? Don't put your headphones in. Don't do that power walk thing that says like, I'm on a mission and don't look at me. Go out there and do that. My wife and I, when we first read this Art of Neighboring book, in the book, they talk about doing that. And we were like, let's do it, right? Let's give it a try. And so we walked around the neighborhood really slowly and just looked to create opportunity, looked to create space to meet people. And it was amazing. So many people looked up when we were walking by, and it was almost like they had that like hopeful look in their eye, like, hey, will you talk to me? Will you connect with me? And usually what I would have done is been like, you know, kind of given a wave or kind of a thing and moved on because I'm doing my thing. But we stopped and we talked with people. Now I know you're probably thinking, I think you're an extrovert, so that probably was really easy. My wife is a wild introvert, really, so we have both stories in our house going on. And even for both of us, there are some times when it is awkward, where it is painful. It's not easy. It's not like I show up and our neighbors are like, yeah, we've been waiting forever. Let's hang out and do all the same things and love each other. In fact, most of those relationships have actually been a little bit difficult at times. We don't always see the same way, think the same way on things, but it's still been so valuable in our lives. Even just yesterday, we're walking around and my wife has this conversation with our neighbor who has been through so much pain in the past 2 years. The loss of her husband, her kids moving away, just so much loneliness. And she told her, hey, like, this is a really hard time for me. I'm just trying to get through each and every day. And I don't know that we can all of a sudden just be like, well, here's the answer for you. But what we can do is walk through those difficult times with her, encourage her, love her, and just take care of her. We would not have those opportunities, those what I believe are Jesus created opportunities, without us being open to creating space in our lives to just go for a walk. Here's another crazy thought. I know this is crazy. The next time you're going somewhere, leave with enough time to have like spare time in between. How many of you are like me and you're like, okay, I've got a 10 o'clock appointment. I'm going to get there at 9:59 in 30 seconds. Or maybe some of you are like, I'm going to get there at 10:02, right? And you get there with just enough time to go into that thing and leave at the time because you're maximizing efficiency, right? Good job. But my encouragement to you is this. Leave and try to get there at like 9:45. And just sit. Don't put your headphones in. Don't take one of those fake phone calls where people can see that you're not on a call still. Like, just see if there's an opportunity to connect with somebody around you. Jesus wants us to love those around us. Jesus wants us to love our neighbor and see them. But if you have your eyes down, if you have your eyes on your phone, which I get it, is a legit thing. Like I'm constantly distracted by that thing. It will be very difficult to see the people that he's putting right there in front of you. Because I'm telling you, it's wild when you begin to shift. And I'm not coming at this with like, hey, my wife and I have it figured out. In fact, it's really challenging. It's been really challenging. But what Jesus has taught us in the past 5 years, 6 years or so about living intentionally in our neighborhoods has been life-changing, more for me than it has been for other people. The second kind of concept, besides being interruptible, is to spend time with Jesus. I like a good old-fashioned, any to-do list people in here? Anyone a to-do list person? I see you. I'm a to-do list person because otherwise I'll forget it because I have the attention span of like that mic stand. It's bad. And so I'll write a to-do list and it has like everything done, like I need to get done for that day. And I'll actually start the next days and be like, okay, let me put it over there. Like I like to do that. It gives me some ideas about, okay, I can get all the things I need to get done. And it's easy to focus on that, right? It's easy to say, okay, I just got to get to the bottom of my to-do list and I'm really accomplished, pat myself on the back. It's been a great day. But again, I would encourage us to, rather than focusing on just efficiency, spend time with Jesus. And I know some of you are coming in, you're like, hey, I'm new to church. I've done the church thing. I don't really feel it. I'm new to who's Jesus. I'm new to all that too. That's okay. That's okay. We're all exploring. We're all on our journey here. But the idea of spending time with Jesus to be able to do this in your neighborhoods and in your workplaces and in your communities is so important, because on your own, it will be a massive challenge. You'll come to the end of yourself so quickly and get so frustrated. And so like, I'm not doing that. I'm just gonna live life for myself, unless you actually spend some time with Jesus. So there's a story in the Bible too, in Luke, and Jesus is heading towards this home to go have dinner. And there's two sisters in there. So you know there's some tension, of course, and some competition, right? And it's Mary and Martha. And Jesus shows up and he's teaching and he's talking, and Mary sits down at his feet and is listening to what he's saying. And Martha is like prepping dinner, like getting the house cleaned up, doing all of the things that she has to do. And right, it's hard to fault Martha, right? Those things have to be done. Like we have to eat, we've got to do those things, right? And Martha begins to build up some bitterness in her heart and say like, hey, like, and she comes to Jesus, which is pretty wild to think about, like going up to Jesus and being like, hey, don't you care? Look at my sister. She's just sitting there and I'm doing all of the work. Tell her to help me. Just in case you're wondering, telling Jesus what to do often doesn't end very well for you. And he says, Martha, Martha, I can just kind of hear this like soft voice, like, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. To spend time with Jesus. It's hard to live with so many things that are distracting you, so many things that kind of vie for your attention. I actually can't even love my wife, my kids, my family, myself, or my neighbors very well unless I am spending time with Jesus. I need like holy help, right? And it's not random. You can't just be like, well, I'm sure Jesus will show up at that point whenever I step into loving my neighbors. You've got to put the time in with him. My life has changed dramatically because I carve space out in the morning, which I don't always love, not hitting my snooze button, but spending time with Jesus. And it looks different for different people. I want you to hear that, right? Like you may not be like, let me get my coffee and sit on the couch and it look like an Instagram photo and all of those kind of things, and that's how I'll do it. One of the ways that I connect with Jesus the most is by going on a hike and just talking to Jesus, venting to Jesus, telling him I'm frustrated, appreciating his creation. And I come back and I feel like, okay, I'm renewed to actually be able to live out my faith in my neighborhood. I need that. And so my encouragement to you is to take some time without distractions this week, and just sit in silence. Maybe it's a little awkward, it's a little difficult sometimes, and think about like, who is God putting on my heart in my neighborhood? And I want you to know this, like we do not believe here that people are projects. Please don't like get a list going of like 5 people in your neighborhood and say, I'm gonna change them. Here I come, I'm coming for them. It's really not about that. What I've found is that, I said this before, but I've actually been more changed than I perceive my neighbors have been by stepping into a relationship with them. Now, there might be something going on in there that they haven't shared with me yet, but it has given me more empathy. It has given me more understanding. It's taught me how to listen better, to see things from other people's perspectives. And you might be like, hey, why did you tell that story about Mary and Martha? I'm going to be the Martha. I'm just going to do my stuff and get things going. Jesus is not coming to my house for dinner. And I would push back a little bit and tell you that I think that he wants to come to your house for dinner in the form of your neighbor. And he wants to show you something and teach you something through that neighbor being in your house. I don't know who God is putting on your heart in your neighborhood. I believe that there is somebody there. I believe that people are searching. I told you the story of our neighbor. That is one story in a multitude of people who are walking through incredibly difficult things, who are in so much pain from what life has thrown at them, and don't necessarily need an answer, like, hey, here's my pat answer. Here's my kind of like solution for you, but just need someone to come alongside them and listen. The best thing you can do is to just simply be in your relationship with your neighbors and love them well. I'm going to ask the band to come up. And as they're coming up, I want you to think about that, right? I want you to really think about that practice, about taking time without distractions and ask God who's in your neighborhood. Maybe you take that bingo card neighborhood thing around your neighborhood and actually be like, hey, I'm going to fill this out, and it's going to be awkward because I'm going to wait outside their door, right? Don't do that, maybe. But, right, go and get to know your neighbors and meet those people that maybe it's been 8, 9, 10 years, 20 years that you've been in the same spot, and you still don't know them. That's okay. Years had been going by before we got to know a lot of our neighbors. I still don't know some of my neighbors. But the impact that they have had on me and that I have hopefully had on them, while not always easy, has been absolutely life-changing. I'm going to pray in closing, and I want you to hear this prayer about asking God where our hearts are at when it comes to loving our neighbors. God, what is your heart for us? What is the next step you desire us to take? God, who are you putting on our hearts in our neighborhood? Maybe it's the people next door. Maybe it's somebody at work. God, maybe it's somebody on the sports team that our kids are a part of. God, maybe it's somebody we walk by every day and simply just wave. But maybe this week we stop, we ask them, we say hi, we push through that awkward feeling, God, and we see them for who they are, God. And that's your creation, a value, God. And God, I pray that as we think about this week, that we carve out the time needed, we carve out the space needed to simply be open to what you have for us, to what you're showing us, God. I pray that you put those neighbors in front of us so clearly this week. Even if it's difficult, God, we pray that you put them in front of us so clearly. In your name, amen.